Okay, well, morning everyone. I can see the numbers are gradually trickling in, so I'll give it a few more seconds before we kick off, but welcome and good morning. Okay, so yeah, thank you all for joining us this morning for this PCA support group webinar. And really sorry as ever to not be able to see you all in person, but nice to be able to connect in this format at least, and hope you've all got your coffees ready. We have a really good agenda this morning, so we won't talk too much before we kick off with the interviews and the conversations, but really nice to have you join us today. If I haven't met you before, I'm Emma Harding. I'm a research fellow at the Dementia Research Centre and have been co-chairing the PCA support group for a few years now. So hopefully there's some familiar faces tuned in today, but also a really warm welcome to any of you if this is your first PCA support group webinar. And I'm just going to hand over to Seb to introduce himself and give some brief updates.
Hi everyone, lovely to see you, and just to echo Emma's warm welcome on this very chilly day. My name is Seb Crutch. I'm one of the psychologists at the Dementia Research Centre and RDS, and it's a pleasure to see you all. Likewise, very sad not to be welcoming new friends and old friends, and so particularly if you're here for the first time, when we would usually be coming to get to know you and wanting to hear about your story, then I'm really sorry we can't do that one-to-one for now. But I hope you'll find something of interest in the meeting. I was just going to briefly update on a few bits of progress and exciting developments at RDS. So one particular thing we're going to just give you a quick heads up about is the invitation for the next round of small online discussion groups will be coming out to you next week around the 9th of December. So that's a whole programme of opportunities for you to meet in small groups of 10 or so people, and to discuss a whole variety of different practical and more kind of experience-based issues with some light touch facilitation from the team during the months of February, March and April. So please do look out for those. And also to thank a number of you who've been kindly contributing to our plan to develop a new online forum for all of the RDS members with PCA and other rarer dementias. So we're really indebted to wonderful web developer Nick Knight, who's working on that opportunity for us to connect in new ways online and share comments and resources that we've all found helpful. I'm particularly excited to be working with the team behind the PCA Facebook group, so Jan Womack, Martina Wise and others, and thinking how we can blend together better the professional support and the support that we have in these support groups, where it's a mixture of professionals by experience and professionals by trade, and the more personal formats that those Facebook groups provide. So really hope that will be an exciting new opportunity for you to connect with each other and with others living with PCA, living across the UK and also internationally. I think that's all my updates for now, so I'll hand back to Emma, but I really hope you enjoy the meeting and can't wait to be back with you in person soon.
Thank you, Seb. And I was just going to add to that a couple of research updates. So just to make you aware that some of you will already know of a document called the Stages of PCA document. And this is something that Seb and other colleagues who are probably familiar to a lot of you, so Jill Walton and Tim Shakespeare and others, originally developed a few years ago in conversation with support group members to try and better plot the different stages of PCA and what things become difficult at which times, because we know when people receive a diagnosis, they really want to know what's going to happen next, and there's not a lot of information out there about that. So we'll soon be working to refine those stages more, to validate them, and to just add some extra information into there about different strategies at different stages and different professionals that it may be helpful to connect with at different stages. So we will be sending a survey to you all shortly, so keep an eye out for that. If you would be happy to help and to contribute to that document, that would be brilliant. And the other thing is the RDS impact study, which many of you have taken part in. It's a 5-year study which is going on at the moment and all being done online at the moment, to better understand the value of support groups for people with rarer types of dementia. And there's lots of different ways to get involved in that study. So whether you want to help out with the website or do some questionnaires and scales, or whether you'd rather do interviews, there are also some creative activities involving drawing and poetry, So just a general sort of reminder that that's ongoing, and if you would like to be involved, if you drop us a line to research@raredementiasupport.org, one of the team will be really happy to talk to you about different ways to be involved with that. So with that in mind, we'll now get on with the rest of the webinar this morning, and we have a few videos, interviews and updates to come up. But just to remind you that the second half of the webinar will be a Q&A panel. So if you have any questions that you'd like to put to the panel, if you just type them into the question box, which you should be able to see on your GoToWebinar application, then members of the team will feed those through to the panelists in the second half of the session. So do let us know if you have any questions. And the first video, I'm delighted to introduce RDS member Michael Andrews in conversation with Claire Waddington from the RDS Direct Support team, talking about Michael's experiences with PCA. And he's actually gone above and beyond, and I think the intro and outro music we're about to hear is actually a recording of Michael playing the accordion, which is really exciting. So here we go with our first video, and we'll see you after this.
Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here today with Michael, who has a diagnosis of PCA. He also has a really fantastic sense of humour and some really wonderful strategies that enable him to live independently. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Michael. Would you be able to start by telling us a bit about the signs that you first noticed before you got your diagnosis of PCA?
I was actually a lorry driver, and I found I was starting to struggle a bit, especially at night, because say I was running at night when it was dark and I'm on the motorway, I couldn't judge the lines on the motorway. I was starting to drift, and then headlights coming towards me were starting to throw me a lot because I couldn't work out in relation where I was on the motorway or on the roads. But I'll be honest, I was putting it down that maybe I hadn't enough sleep, I was tired, or I was under stress. But I just carried on. But then I started having stupid accidents by myself. I was injuring myself a lot of times with a truck. I'd put my hand on the trailer, on the floor of the trailer, and a forklift driver was loading it. And as he's putting the pallet down, for some reason I forgot to pull my hand away, and he set it down on top of my thumb, and he crushed my thumb. And I finished up at the hospital at Newcastle. And then I done the same at Barnsley. I was struggling to get up. They call it a curtain on the trailer, and there's two big massive poles, and you've got to put them in, and then you wrench your curtain to tighten it up. And one of the poles it looked as if it was slightly bent, and I just couldn't fit it in the pin at the top. And then I got it in, and then I couldn't get the bottom one in, so I used the crowbar, and I'm trying to lever it up. But I done it all wrong, and I absolutely wrenched I tore all the muscle and ligaments in this shoulder. That put me on the sickness benefit because I couldn't drive with it, and I was attending the hospital for treatment. But I'd noticed while I was working, my eyesight started getting worse. I kept going through a terrible lot of pairs of glasses. I was starting to struggle around the house, so I found I was starting to get confused a bit. And I thought, I'll go and see the GP and see if, and they says to me, it actually sounds like a form of dementia, but we can't diagnose that. We can do a memory test. But there's two things again. You're actually too young for dementia. It could be, they thought maybe it could be, maybe you're getting depressed because you're out of work. That could be the sign of it. So they've done the memory test and it says, well, there is a slight decline in it, but we wouldn't call that dementia. But what we'll do is we'll refer you to the memory team. And then the memory team were confused as well. They says, well, it looks as if it's your eyes what's causing all this. So I went back to the optician. They referred me to the hospital. The hospital done tests, and they sent me to the university to put EEG, is it they call it, the strobes on your head. Done that, and then they says, your eyes is absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with your eyes, but we've noticed the back of the brain isn't receiving the signals from your eyes. We need to refer you back to your memory team. So I went back to those, and they says, no, we think this is neurology. So they referred me to neurology. And it was just a case of going backwards from neurology to the memory for 16 months until I got diagnosed.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that, Michael. I think what you're talking about there with the time that it takes to get that diagnosis of PCA and the backwards and forwards, it sounds really frustrating, and I think it is something that other people will have experienced as well who have a diagnosis of PCA. I wonder if it would be possible to tell us a little bit about the day-to-day challenges that you have now resulting from the physical impacts of the PCA.
It's mainly eyesight problem I struggle with. I can't, if I go out, I can't judge. You know, when you're walking along the pavement and then you come to the end of the pavement and it drops down onto the road, I can't judge how far the road is from the pavement. And also, if there's a car parked on the pavement, half on the pavement, half on the road, I struggle to judge the distance in between the car and say the fence. If I'm out walking, I have to keep walking with a building right to the side of me. If I go out into the middle of a pavement, you know, the like of a shopping centre where it's all pedestrianised, I can't go in the middle because people actually think I'm drunk because I start swaying. I can't coordinate myself to keep in a straight line. So what I've learned to do is walk where there's something that I tend to do it with my left side. So I'll walk where something's on my left side. And that sort of keeps me coordinated, then I can walk sort of straight.
Thank you for explaining some of those challenges. And I know that we've spoken before about a particular challenge that you had in terms of tin openers and what happened with trying to figure out what was happening there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's actually funny because I didn't think it was me. I actually thought the tin openers were all broke. I think it was because I wasn't using them every day. It was only once in a blue moon that I needed to use a tin opener, and then I found I just couldn't open the tin. And then to me, the tin opener was broke, and I would go out and buy another one, but I would buy a more expensive one. And then a couple of days later, or the week after, it was the same all over again. I couldn't use it. And then I kept thinking, but something's wrong. All these tin openers seem to be broke. they're badly made. And then, but I kept buying a dearer one, thinking that it's the tin openers. And then it was the occupational therapist had come out, and she noticed that I had a kitchen drawer full of tin openers. And she says, Michael, what's going on here? I said, all these tin openers are broke. I can't find a tin opener what actually works. And she says, you know, I want to see you opening a tin. And I think it was a tin of beans. And she says, open that tin. And I just couldn't do it. And she actually says to me, you know, Michael, it's not the tin opener. She said, it's actually you. She says, you're just not working them right. You've just seemed to have forgotten how to use a tin opener. And then we'll come up with an electric one. It threw me at the start because you set your tin on it, and you lower the top down, and it grabs the tin, and then as you push down, the tin spins. But I kept thinking the tin's going to fall off, because to me there's nothing holding the tin. And she says to me, no, you just leave the tin. The tin's held on by magnets. And I mean, I'm still using it.
That's fantastic, Michael. And I think using assistive technology like that is one of a really, really wonderful set of strategies that you have. So we know that quite a few people affected by PCA have found the COVID-19 restrictions particularly difficult recently. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about how that's impacted you and the strategies that you've been using?
Well, the very first lockdown, I actually thought I wasn't going to get through it, because I got into my routines. A routine for me might have been going out. I always got up early in the morning, and I always had to get out. Because I lived on my own, I think I had to be near people. And then I had a lot of dementia groups. I'd done some things with the Bradford University, which meant I was getting out doing things, talking to people, and to me that was my routine. And then lockdown, all that was took off me, and I was sitting. They says to me, they classed me as high risk because I had cancer as well. So they put me in the high risk category, and they told me you can only go into your garden. But with me living on my own, what had happened was that the OT wasn't allowed to come out. She could make a phone call, but she couldn't actually come to my house. And then I found I'm not going to get through this, because all my routines is gone. I've no strategies. Everything's been thrown out the window. And then I found it was affecting my speech. My speech was starting to deteriorate. I was starting to, if somebody phoned me up, I found I was struggling on the phone. I just couldn't get the words, or I couldn't pronounce the words. And I actually thought that I'm not going to be able to do this. I think at the start, because I didn't know what to do. With me always being out, I thought I'm just looking at four walls all day. And then it was affecting my sleep pattern. I found I was sort of basically up all night and then sleeping through the day. Well, when I say sleeping through the day, it was like cat naps, you know. I'd sit on the seat, and then I would doze off for about 10 or 20 minutes, and then waking up, and then it was like that the whole day. And then at night, when I should be going to bed, I just couldn't sleep. And it finished up, I was just sitting watching the TV all night. But then I started to change things. I knew I had to get something in the house. I had to make routines for the house. Now, some people would think, well, that's not a routine, but to me it was, because that's what kept me ticking over. I would pick a day for each room, sort of tidy or vacuum. So I might say, right, Monday I'll do all downstairs, Tuesday I'll do all upstairs, and then Wednesday I'll do all downstairs again. But to me that was a routine. It was actually giving me something to do, and then because I was playing the flute and accordion, I would say, right, I'll do an hour on the flute, and then I would go and do something else, and then I would maybe have an hour on the accordion. And I found then I was actually starting to pick up, but I think it was because it got routines back again. But my panic was, I was panicking over what happens when they tell me I can start going out again. Am I going to get into the routines in the house, and I won't want to break them, to have to start to change into different routines again?
Yes, thank you so much for describing the difficulties that you had and the ways that you put in routines to help manage that. And I think we've also spoken about you picking up your social contacts with people, sitting with people outside when you could, and also having phone and video calls with people to keep that social contact as well, and kind of the positive impact that that's had for you as well.
Yeah, well, I found once, it was the 1st of August, they told me I can start going out again. But I was told I can't meet any more than 6 people outside. I'd still got to keep my distance from people, you know, a 2-meter distance. But I did struggle a wee bit at the start. I just didn't feel safe. Say I caught the bus into the town, I didn't feel safe on the bus. But then I got over that. And then I started to meet people who I was talking to before the first lockdown. And we would sit, but I would always sit outside the coffee shop. And well, I don't actually drink coffee, I drink herbal tea. So I'd get my pot of herbal tea. It was always lemon and ginger with a dash of honey in it. And I'd sit outside and I'd have my tea. And then somebody else would come who I was friends with, and they would sit on the chair opposite, you know, at the table. So we'd sit and have a chat and a laugh. And then maybe somebody else would come and they would take another chair on another table. So, but it always worked out about five or six people. But then I started to realize that if it was raining, and they would say, we'll go in, Michael, it's raining. I would go in, but I just couldn't cope with it inside. And I would make excuses, but I actually don't think it was it was COVID related. I actually think I got that I couldn't do where there was a lot of people, a lot of noise. Even though sitting outside there was people walking past, but inside I felt, what do you call it, claustrophobic. You're sitting indoors and you've got walls all around you, and you've people sitting all on different tables, and you can hear people laughing and talking. And then I found I couldn't concentrate on the people what I was with because there was too much background noise. So I actually found I just couldn't do it inside. I had to be outside.
Absolutely. And with PCA, it can be sensory things other than vision that can be affected as well. So I think your explanation of changing your strategies so that you can continue to socialize, but to reduce how overwhelming it is for you, I think that's a really, really helpful thing to do. And Michael, I just wondered, just to finish off, if you had any advice for people living with PCA or for people supporting somebody with PCA in terms of maintaining that positivity and that independence.
The only thing is, I know for me, if you took the tin openers where I thought it's not me, and I thought it's things is broke, I've actually learned from that. You still need somebody to guide you. You still need somebody to keep you right. I'm not saying for somebody else to do the things for you. I'm saying for somebody just to keep a check to make sure you're doing it the correct way. And I do know for me, living on my own, I actually don't think I could have done it without my OT. I definitely know I still need some form of a support to live independently.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right that it's not about taking things away from you and doing things for you. It's about working with that partnership to make sure that you have that support and that independence that you need. So thank you so much, Michael, for really wonderfully describing the ways that you are keeping independent and the support that's been helpful for you as well. So we will have Michael joining us on the panel. So if you do have any questions for him, please do post them into the question box, and we'll have him joining us later as well. But thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, you're welcome.
Huge thanks to Michael and Claire for that conversation, and I'm sure there was a lot in there that will really be resonating for many of you at home, and just so helpful to hear Michael describe those challenges, but also how he's managing those, and with the support of his occupational therapist as well. So thank you to Michael. And as Claire said, if you do have questions for Michael in particular about his experiences, please do send them in and we can put those to him in the panel section after the break. We're now going to have a brief update from the direct support team, including an introduction to some new members that we're really excited to welcome to the team. So that's what we'll have now.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to be speaking to you all today. As you can imagine, we would much rather be looking at your lovely faces today as opposed to our screens, and we're really excited to see everybody again in person when it's safe to do so. To introduce myself for those who I've not had the pleasure of speaking to, I'm Olivia, or Livy, and I'm part of the ever-growing direct support team. And today I'm going to be introducing you to some of our newer staff members, Hannah, who is our newly appointed Admiral Nurse, and Trish, who is our Rights and Entitlement Support Worker. First, just to say, living with a rare form of dementia at any time brings everyday challenges for the person and for those around them. Coronavirus is making daily life much harder. You may feel anxious, scared, or lonely, but you're not alone. Help and support is available through the direct support team. As of last week, we have a total of 2,084 members signed up to Rare Dementia Support, and this is from around the world. This number includes people who have a diagnosis, their family members, friends, and also healthcare professionals who've come to us directly for support and advice for people with a rare type of dementia. And this number is increasing. So what can the direct support team do? So we can provide you with post-diagnostic and person-centered support, along with information and advice about rare dementia. So things like navigating the healthcare system, getting a formal diagnosis, helping people understand their diagnoses, so things like common symptoms. We can also signpost you to relevant services, and this assists greatly with care planning, and we can guide you to appropriate local help. During the coronavirus pandemic, we also have advice and practical tips for people living with dementia and for those supporting them, either in the same household or from a distance. We can offer confidential support via email, telephone call, or through an online video call platform called GoToMeeting that's a lot like Zoom. And if you think either yourself or your loved one would benefit from this, please contact us at contact@raredementiasupport.org. Now, I'm going to hand over and introduce you to some of our new members. Firstly, to introduce Hannah, who is our newly appointed Admiral Nurse.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to be part of the Rare Dementia Support team and to even speak to you even over the sort of situation. Unfortunately I can't see your faces, but it's nice to come and talk about my new role as an Admiral Nurse at the Rare Dementia Support team. My background is I've been an Admiral Nurse for 3 years. I worked in a hospital environment as the Admiral Nurse there, and I've got a real passion for dementia. Unfortunately I lost my own mum to young onset dementia and has a real enlightened a lot of passion in me to improve care and support for carers, especially living with dementia. Admiral nursing is really about supporting the whole family, and my role at the Rare Dementia Support team is quite a unique Admiral nurse role, and it's focusing on certain areas that you might need support in, and focusing on sort of complex needs, helping with interventions that might help to care for someone with dementia, advice, talking through situations, especially if someone's committed in hospital, and giving you support there. And every sort of family is unique, and it's about supporting you through each of those stages, but also really focusing on the middle to late stages, which can bring its own challenges. And it's about recognising loss and grief that you might feel, and having that Admiral nurse to talk to, and we can work through the situations together. And also with the role, it's also about educating other Admiral nurses about what the service and support is available at the Rare Dementia Support team, so they can tell people around the UK to come and register with the Rare Dementia Support team, get the support. And there's so many different services that team offer, but the Admiral nurse is really focusing on the complex and middle to late stages. So please get in contact if you feel you need support, and we'll be happy to help you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Hannah. It's so amazing to have you part of the team. And now over to Trish, who is our rights and entitlement support worker.
Hello, I'm Trish O'Hara and I'm new to RDS, and what I will say is I'm very excited to be part of an extremely niche team that can really offer lots of support that overlaps, and we all help each other, hopefully help you. And what I think when I think of rights as an entitlement, well, I would argue that when you're diagnosed with dementia, you have a right to push for a full diagnosis. Quite often people with diagnosis of dementia go home just knowing it's dementia, but knowing very little else. And actually, there's a lot of complex potential diagnosis that you could learn about. And I think one thing we can think about is how you get a decent diagnosis or a more complex diagnosis that will take you further into a treatment plan. And also thinking about what you're entitled to. Well, you're entitled to get it wrong, you're entitled to feel like you can't do it on your own, and you're entitled to fail at this, and you're entitled to ask for help. You know, sometimes people will say that love is not always enough at the stages of dementia where you need support. And I'm somebody who's worked and professionally and personally cared for people with dementia, right from healthcare services within home care and residential care. So I'm hoping that I'll be of use to help you navigate what can be a very difficult and complicated system. Thank you. Looking forward to meeting you somewhere or other. Bye.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And yeah, amazing additions to the team. And again, for everybody out there, if you think either yourself or your loved one would benefit from contacting us, whether you've got any questions or you'd like to arrange a support call with us, then please do feel free to email us. Our email address again is contact@raredementiasupport.org. That's contact@raredementiasupport.org. Lovely. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks very much, Livy and Trish and Hannah, for that, and really exciting to see the team growing as it is, and to be able to extend the support that is offered to our members. And Trish and Hannah, as a reminder, will be on our panel later on. So again, any questions that you would like to address specifically to either of them, please do send those in via the question box. And next up we have RDS members Chris and Susan McGrath in conversation with our direct support team lead Nikki Zimmerman, and they will be sharing a little bit about their experience of the PCA diagnosis and how they cope with PCA day to day. So over to them.
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here with you this morning, and I'm so pleased to have Chris and Sue with me this morning. Good morning, Chris and Susan.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing some of your experience with everybody who's watching us today. Can you give me a little bit of background about receiving the diagnosis, first of all, please?
It was devastating and it was quite shocking. Say a bit more about how you felt. You said about your driving license.
Well, I lost everything. My job, my car, my hat, friends, everything.
It sounds like it was a really difficult time. And was there lots of assessments involved in this?
Well, no, I think it was just him and you and me, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was trying to think. I know he did do, the consultant did want to get Susan to do the sorts of tests, three-dimensional. One on a computer involved 3 mountains of different size. You'd spin it around and you'd have to tell him whether the mountain at the back was the bigger one or the smaller one. So quite difficult perception. I had a feeling that was after the actual diagnosis, but I might be wrong. But Susan started crying and he said, "This is obviously upsetting you. We won't carry on with the sort of research." Having just told her that her life had ended, basically, or her life as she'd known it.
So it,
yeah, wasn't very kind. Yeah, told me I will be going blind, and that's why I wander around in the town now with a stick.
so really, you feel that perhaps sort of this part, the assessment, the actual diagnosis, could have been done an awful lot better.
Yes,
a bit kinder to you. Yes.
It couldn't have been done much worse.
It couldn't have been done much worse. Oh dear me, goodness.
Looking back on it, I think it was. Yeah, it's difficult to know whether. I think she'd already been assessed by that stage. I think he was just confirming, because a year before she certainly had all the symptoms. But I think, I mean, it's never easy to give a diagnosis like that, but I think it could have been done very simply and then just brought the meeting to an end or asked for questions. But there was no follow-up meeting. I think we probably should have had an appointment then with the GP or somebody to explain what would happen. I did a lot of Googling and looked at Seb Crutch's videos and things, so I was quite, within a couple of days, I was quite well up to date with it. But yeah, Susan was so shattered. She needed a lot of support, which didn't come.
And that there was no post-diagnostic support, no nurses or any support workers there straight after the assessment and the diagnosis.
It was literally just the 3 of us, yeah.
And so you really both sort of felt very much on your own and very alone at that point.
Well, I remember because this is 30 miles away, on the way home we stopped for a coffee and we just looked at each other and didn't know what to do. We were bereft.
And was there a long sort of lead up to this, sort of through other health professionals?
No, I was carrying on as normal.
Yeah, I don't think you were working. I think Susan had given up work to look after our grandchildren, but she had been running her own education consultancy. Yeah, I think most of the, I think it's probably easier if I say, most of the previous 2-3 years had been through ophthalmology in local district general, which is the Conquest Hastings. Dozens and dozens of tests and different spectacles and lenses. So it was quite late on that anybody twigged that it might be a neurological condition.
So for a long time you were going very much down the road of there was a problem with Susan's eyes.
I should think 2 years was going down the wrong road.
Oh, that must have been awfully frustrating.
Yeah.
So afterwards, it was really up to yourselves then to go and find some support.
How did we get to?
Sussex.
No, not Sussex. How did we get in London?
UCL. Yeah, I think luckily, I mean, on from the diagnosis within quite a fairly short time, I'd emailed Seb, and I think it's about the same time we'd volunteered for any research that was going, because Susan was quite being involved in education. She was quite keen that anything we could do to avoid other people being in this situation, we would do. So we got on to UCL's various research programs, and Seb said come to UCL, which is quite easier for us to get to UCL actually from Rye than it is to get to our designated neurological unit, which is Haywards Heath, which is actually quite difficult to get to for us. We have to drive across the county. So once we got involved with the research, then Alex Fuchs at UCL said, you know, when you're coming up and down here for this, I might as well take over as your consultant. So we were very happy for him to do that. And he's looked after Susan since then. You got pretty fond of him, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
You miss him now, so.
Yeah. Don't see him much now.
But that's good. So you've got that. At least you have that safety there now, and you've been happy coming up to London.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID.
The guy that did the diagnosis actually was working in association with UCL, so I think. But I think we did it separately. I think we asked whether we could be moved.
So you're under Alex in UCL.
I think once we got the contact with UCL, I was comfortable in my own mind that we got the best people. You know, you always want to go to the experts. I felt once we got with the Dementia Research Centre that was the right place to be. Oh, what I was about to say was our GP, luckily, is a woman GP, and she's always been absolutely wonderful.
That's good.
She's always said, she said to Sue right at the start, don't worry, we'll look after you. You know, I'll always be.
Good. That's reassuring. It's so important to have a good GP. It really is.
Yeah. Well, we hear from since then, 2013. We've obviously met several other couples, and some seem to have been, well, let's say, not very well supported. You know, no suggestion of drugs, basic drugs, or follow-up or research or anything. Just, this is what you've got, it's terminal, get used to it. So I think in some ways, since we got involved with Queen Square, we feel that we're getting, well, I feel we're getting better than a lot. And I think partly because Susan's started from a very high academic level.
Very high functioning.
That's helped. And I think physically she's very healthy, lungs and chest and everything. But from this bit at the back of her brain, she's actually probably 90% fit.
Absolutely. That's good to hear. So how has it affected you, sort of having PCA as a couple together? What sort of impacts has it had on your lives?
What do you think? You resent it a bit,
What?
living together as a couple.
I would like a little bit more chance of doing things on my own, because I've always been on my own. You know, when I was, and it's I find it really difficult to always being having to somebody else do things for me.
Yeah.
Fiercely independent always.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Susan is sometimes quite resentful that she has to ask me to help her get dressed, or and it's happened. I think with the main thing I'd say to summarise the whole 8 years is that I assumed at the start, right, we've got to get power of attorney, we've got to find care homes, we've got to get this, we've got to get children, we've got everything. And actually, it's such a slow process. Every week or month, Susan's slightly less able than the previous month. And I've gradually, slowly over 8 years, adapted and taken on extra stuff. So it's almost been imperceptible. But I'm really pleased that we're able to be here together. So as a couple, I feel that it's made us closer.
Yeah, we did the couple session back earlier in the summer when we did our small groups, and you two took part, which was amazing. And this was one of the things that really shone out sort of for us, that sort of, you know, how close you are as a couple. And, you know, even sort of with the diagnosis there, Susan's always sort of been sort of very much sort of independent and you're voicing her opinion.
Yeah, we've Susan used to say in the old days, we're not joined at the hip. You know, we've both got our separate lives, and that has been the way we've lived most of the time. I mean, we have been a close couple as well, but we're pleased we did a lot of our travelling and overseas stuff before this diagnosis, so we've got no huge regrets in that way, I don't think.
No. Well, I miss.
What do you mean?
Over the water?
Oh, I don't know, Scotland. France.
No,
Canada.
No, when I was ready to do work up there. Oh, come on, help me out.
Where were you, Stratford?
No.
You said over the water.
No, yes, where?
Ireland. She said over the water, but I can't think which bit of water.
When I was ready to work on the dig.
Oh yes, this is Orkney. Yeah, he was ready to do. Well, we did start digging at a Neolithic site. I mean, it's one of the most important sites in Europe. And there again, just almost an off chance email to the director of the excavation, and he said, "Yeah, come up in the summer." I said, "Well, we're at that time in our 60s or whatever." But that was super. Yeah. But really, that summer, Susan was asked to fill in, as the fines were noted, to fill in a form. She said, "I can't do it. These words keep moving." So that was the summer before the diagnosis, and that was the only time we actually dug at that site.
That sounds fantastic. A great opportunity.
Yeah.
Since then.
Yeah, we still send money to the digs.
Yeah, Susan set up a Susan McGrath Archaeological Fund so that students could travel from other parts of Scotland if they were poor, and that helps them travel and get basic accommodation. So we've had that link since the diagnosis, since we've had to stop digging.
What a fantastic opportunity. And I know you two are very busy with your lives now, and obviously with coronavirus pandemic, it's it has made sort of things a bit more difficult, sort of getting out and doing things. But you still do quite a lot of activities, don't you? And one of the things that we spoke about previously was the rock choir that you're involved with.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And that's not exactly a rock choir. It's more sort of easy listening. With, not Simon Garfunkel, who would you say? Everly Brothers. You know, it's more sort of 70s pop music rather than rock. Because another one of our members is in a rock choir, which is slightly different. Yeah, we have one every week, and we do it on Zoom. There's about 9 or 10 of us and the girl with the keyboard, and we all have to mute so that our singing doesn't upset all the others, because there's a slight time delay. But you still enjoy that.
I love singing. Yeah.
You have said that it saves your life.
Mm. Yeah. If I didn't have that, I think I would have given up. I would have given up a long time ago.
Yeah, it is probably the single best thing that Susan does, because she does remember all the words of all the songs. And when we're singing away to the computer on the Zoom sessions, I mean, nobody can hear us, but we're singing away at the top of our voice. So
sounds like it brings a lot of joy to your life, Susan.
Yes. Well, I try.
Good.
Well, yeah, the choir is really important. On what?
And the children.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes. Well, I don't see my children very much, but when they do get around, it's fine.
Brilliant. And have you got any tips for anybody today that's watching?
To do with coronavirus, is it? Or?
Yeah, I think.
Well, with the lockdown and sort of keeping going while we're sort of very restricted to what we can do.
I think one important thing that people don't treat you like a baby. God.
Absolutely.
In the shops and that.
Well, assume that, you know, I'm gaga, which I'm not.
I think if you've got a brain condition, it's assumed you're a mental defective of some sort, or you're mentally ill. Yeah, that probably is an assumption. Most people are very supportive. They understand the situation. Most know the diagnosis, and most of our friends and family. So I don't think anybody's judgmental. And we still get involved about. Just before lockdown, we had a lunch with 6 of us, like a group, and I think the discussion's so fast that Susan has a job keeping up, but certainly you were involved when we went to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for sharing your experiences with us today. And we're going to be on the panel later with a few questions, so people can send some questions in with us and ask about your experiences. Would that be okay?
Yeah, it's right. That's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much to Chris and Susan and Nikki for that. I think it's really helpful to hear you both, Chris and Susan, talking so frankly and openly about your experiences and your feelings and frustrations. And I'm sure a lot of that resonates with many of our members. And I think there's something very validating for people who have had a similar experience to know that they're not alone in that. So thank you for sharing. Also really highlights the complexity of the diagnostic process and the importance of support throughout that, and really encouraging to hear how you're continuing to be involved in some of those things that really do keep you going. So thank you both. I would now like to welcome all of our panelists for the Q&A session now. So if everyone who's on the panel could switch their cameras on and mics on and join us now. Thanks, Kia.
Thanks, Emily.
So we have, Chris and Susan and Michael, our RDS members. Thank you for joining us here for the questions. And we have Trish and Hannah from the direct support team. And we have John is about to appear, I think. So some of you will already know Professor John Schott, who is Consultant Neurologist at UCL and Chief Medical Officer for Alzheimer's Research UK. And Kia is going to chair the questions session, and lots of you will know Kia. So Dr. Kia Yong is Senior Research Fellow at UCL and has been involved with the PCA support group for many years. I'm sure lots of you know Kia. And I'm going to disappear now. And thank you all for who have sent in questions, and do continue to do so. We can keep feeding those through.
Thanks, Emma, for the introductions. And thank you all for joining us today. It's lovely to hear some familiar and new voices. We've had a number of people submit questions leading up to this session, as well as during this meeting. And as Emma mentioned, please feel free to continue submitting questions through the group chat. I was going to start with a few member questions that are perhaps more on the medical side. I was then going to cover a few relating more to using computers and phones during this particularly challenging period, and then maybe move towards some updates on treatment and research. So for my first question from the members, the question is, we feel uncertain about how PCA changes over time and how to plan certain aspects of our lives. What can we expect to happen next? And I thought it best maybe to initially direct this question towards John and Hannah.
Hi there, can I just check? I'm having a bit of a trouble with my webcam. Is that, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear and see you fine.
So the sort of questions is around the stages of PCA, is that right?
And how to plan.
So, and how to plan. So I'll talk in rather sort of generic terms, and I think that perhaps in fact Kia and others can pick up on sort of more of the research side, because Seb and Kia and others have as was mentioned in the introduction, worked some time ago about putting together a sort of a more formal pattern of staging of PCA of the various different stages, and I know that that's work that's ongoing, and Seb has been leading on updating that with Emma, with a view to getting a lot of input from people in RDS as well. And I think that the first thing to say is that I think there are pros and cons about thinking about staging of PCA. So I think the advantages are that it allows people to plan and think ahead and to know a little bit about what's coming up. I think some of the disadvantages sometimes of staging is that people want to pigeonhole themselves into sort of one group rather than another. And my take on this is that perhaps it's most useful just to think about the sort of the generic progression of the illness, rather than necessarily saying I'm stage 2 or I'm in stage 3, etc. I think that can be useful, but of course what we'll see and we'll hear, and we've heard beautifully expressed by our panelists, patients today, is that there is a lot of variability, and what we know is that people are individuals, and how these illnesses, like any illness, affects people is both the type of illness they have and what part of the brain it affects and so forth. But then it's their own individual speed and pace of progression, and then of course it's very much in terms of what their activities of daily living are, what their expectations are, their personalities, their levels of independence, and so forth. And so we can see and we know that patients with PCA, and we think about, you know, clearly sort of thinking about this in terms of, in broadly speaking, the visual version of dementia, which is usually underpinned by Alzheimer's disease, but not always. And so, you know, some of the things that we heard Michael beautifully describing are very, very common of the sort of very early signs, often before diagnosis, with really quite subtle problems and uncertainties about whether this is related to glasses or concentration or mood, and the sort of some of the very subtle problems that people can notice with visual, or bumping the car, or difficulties parking, or difficulties on escalators. And then as things progress, it becomes clear that the vision is a problem, and then problems with reading. And then in terms of progression of symptoms, part of PCA is that it is going to be progressive. The pace of progression is very variable, but generally speaking, PCA often remains really quite remarkably focal. In other words, the parts of the brain that are affected get more affected, but it can remain really quite limited in one area for a while. So people have visual problems, go on to have very profound visual problems whilst retaining quite a lot of other skills, before other skills will often change in terms of the areas of the brain that are around those that will affect vision, so with calculation and spelling and using household tasks, and then perhaps memory, but then often personality and judgment and so forth are really quite preserved till you know, in this illness, which, because it starts really at the back of the brain, whereas the personality and aspects start at the front of the brain. And then in terms of sort of, you know, one can track things in multiple ways, and researchers like tracking things in terms of brain scanning and subtle cognitive changes and so forth. And then as clinicians, and I think as people involved in care, there's much more interest actually when people reach milestones of independence, because you can have subtle visual problems which may or may not be getting worse, better or worse on some particular test, but it's when then you reach a crunch point and actually can't read on your own, and therefore need to have talking books or have difficulty leaving the house on your own. So I think in terms of, you know, the staging, you know, we can provide details, and there's details on the website about various stages, but I think the take-home message that I would have is that these are very useful in terms of sort of planning and thinking about descriptions about what is likely to happen. But I think on an individual basis, it's important to focus on the individual and their specific needs. And we use this rather trite expression often in our clinics of planning for the, hoping for the best and planning for the worst, that you need to know what might be coming down the road, but at the same time living in the moment and making particular plans and care plans for that individual, because how any illness affects people is on a very individual basis. So I'm not quite sure if that's answered the questions and been sort of sufficiently sort of vague about things, which doctors always will do, but I hope that gives some views, and very interested in Trish and others' views as well.
It's different.
Definitely, and from my sort of aspect of planning for the future, it's really important that we all sort of think about our future and have things like advanced care plans put in place, where you can openly talk to your family members about your wishes for the future. And also really important that carers really identify themselves as carers and get contact the local adult social services to get care assessments, so you have things in place to look after yourself as well, and looking at really at the whole holistic place situation as well, and a lot of mindfulness as well, not worrying too far about the future and being very present and enjoying what you can do as well now, and also about making your home, adapting your home, things in place, and thinking about OTs that can come to your house and make it more for you to be more independent at home, which is really important, and realising everyone with different types of dementia are different as well. So as you said, symptoms and stages are all different, and try not to compare yourself with other people with a similar situation, because we're all so different, and also seek help from the dementia support team, and I'll be happy to support families and carers at all stages too.
It's valuable because you did say how much.
And in my response to that as well, to add to what John and Hannah just said, is I think when we're thinking of the damage to the brain that John was describing at the back of the brain, will often mean that people who are living through this experience, PCA, is that they keep mental capacity throughout a lot of the process. Unlike some other dementias where people might lose their ability to make decisions and to be in control, people with PCA may, and quite often will, retain control of their life, be able to make decisions. And coming back to Chris's conversation with Susan, you can see that Chris remains constant in his inclusion of Susan to be able to ensure that Susan's in control of her decision making and making contributions. And that's what's remarkable about PCA. Whilst people's navigation of the physical world is really debilitating for people and really frightening and really difficult, with the right support, they still can be at the centre or in control of their decision making, and that's vital. And we need to expect to hold on to that for as long as possible.
I think that's absolutely right, and in fact, which is why when many of you will have helped in our research and outreach and so forth, and in fact, patients with PCA are some of the people that we call on most, because I think people with PCA often will challenge what the general public and in fact other doctors will think about as someone with dementia, in as much as people, as we've heard beautifully described by our two panelists, people can express themselves extremely eloquently, and people sort of do a double take and say, well, hang on a moment, what, you know, this isn't what we expect, and so I think that's also something that comes out of the PCA world and work, and something that we're very aware of, and it's one of the many aspects why we like and are very interested in working in PCA, and grateful to you for all of your contributions to our work, which I think extend. There's very much the sort of feeling that PCA is its own specific area, and I would very much challenge that, because I think it provides us with such a lot of information about these conditions and why they affect certain parts of the brain on a research level. And I think in terms of a sort of the societal benefits, I think it's a lovely way of challenging people's preconceptions about dementia, and about capacity, and about what dementia means, and about, as we've heard, living well with dementia as well as, and about our autonomy, and that's also incredibly important. So this is very much, like I think I say every time I speak to one of these things, this is very much a two-way street. We learn from you, and you contribute as much to us and our work and what we would like to do in the wider dementia field as hopefully we do to you in supporting you.
So we've had a great breadth of responses from the panel, and I'd like to echo what John was saying in our gratitude towards research participants and also people who are very much involved in engagement with professionals to raise awareness of PCA and rare forms of dementia. Can I put to the remainder of the panel? So Chris, Sue, Michael, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Sorry, carry on, Michael.
I was just going to say, people keep saying about stages. The day that when they actually diagnosed me, I was sitting in the office, and the doctor says to me, I'm sorry to tell you, you've got posterior cortical atrophy dementia, which absolutely threw me because I'd never heard of any of it. And then once he said dementia, I sort of switched off. While he was talking to me, all I could hear was noise. I couldn't actually take in what he was saying. But he did say something, I'll give you 7. I thought he said 7 years. And then I didn't actually know what he meant. And when I went away, the OT, she had come out, and I says to her, what's this 7 years? And she says, did he say 7 years or did he say 7 stages? And I says, to be honest, I couldn't take in what he was saying. And then she says, well, do you want me to go and find out? And I says, no, forget it. I don't really want to know. Because then if it is 7 years, I'm going to be it's going to be a clock. I'm going to be counting down. Well, I've had 1 year. I'm going to be bad next year. So I says there, no, we'll let it go, because I want to take a day at a time. You know, if I'm getting through today, I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. I'll worry about that when tomorrow comes. So I don't really want to know about stages, and I don't want to know about years.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing. Chris, you had a point?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Michael. That was a super interview. I mean, it's very interesting. A lot of the symptoms were parallel, but what was interesting is Susan comes from a sort of academic reading, writing. She used to write long essays, and so her symptoms were things like words sliding off the edge of pages and that sort of thing. Yours were trying to hook up a truck to its trailer, and the can opener thing. So there are similarities. I'm amazed you're still managing more or less on your own. I think you will need help at some point. I presume you're fairly early on, but it was a fascinating story and some of the things were very familiar, and thank you very much.
Well, can I just say, I've actually got now, I really struggle with my spelling. Reading and writing on arithmetic now is becoming a right problem. I'm on the computer now to do this, but normally I use a tablet, because if I've got to write anything, there's a wee speaker on it, and it predicts what I'm going to say, and it actually spells it for me. On this, I can't do it, so I know I definitely struggle with my reading, my writing, and my arithmetic, you know, my counting.
Yeah, I think, as I said, Susan is a bit resentful that I've got to do the phoning and I've got to turn the computer on, I've got to make the tea, because she couldn't use the phone. The first thing on a phone, we've got all sorts of expensive phones, is you've got to turn it on, which she couldn't do. And then you've got to scroll up and down, which she can't do. So it's not concentrating on what she can't do, it's just accepting that she does need help with these things.
So thanks all. In the interest of time, regarding information on the more research front, so I'll share that in follow-on materials to this meeting. But I'd like to emphasize a point, again, that's really emerging from really everyone's contribution, where there's a lot of differences from one person to the next. So while UCL is the site for the largest study of PCA progression worldwide, we're talking about progression in a group of 100 people. And actually, it doesn't really take into account how from one person to the next, you do see, for example, very prominent differences in terms of initial symptoms, whether those might be to do, say, with visual problems or problems with mental arithmetic, as well as, again, changed over years. And in short, we don't know the reasons behind this variation. So the other thing I'd like to quickly flag up before moving on to the next question is, again, the role of rare dementia support, where from working with research participants who are involved in rare dementia support, they've shared how they've taken a lot from peer-to-peer groups in terms of getting a sense of when to expect at what point, but again, taking into account the fact that people are different, and also what steps people have taken to anticipate later stages. And finally, I'd like to say, Michael, to your point about this number 7. So I can only talk from the experience of working with individual people in research, but I can think of a couple where, again, 7 years after a diagnosis, while there was a lot of visual difficulties, people were still involved in things like more social activities, and actually, again, being relatively fluent in speech, sometimes having this tip of the tongue phenomenon, or sometimes getting sounds jumbled up, but essentially still being able to engage in a number of activities. So my next question is directed to Michael. As a person with a diagnosis of PCA, I find it difficult sometimes joining video conferences and with using mute and unmute buttons. Do you have any strategies that you use to help with this?
I'll be honest, I tend to use my tablet more. This is the only time I'm actually using the computer. I struggle with the computer side. I'm okay using my tablet because everything's there in front of me. I can actually basically see what I'm doing. On the computer, I just haven't a clue. So I actually find, for me, it's easier using a tablet.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
I suppose it's getting support, isn't it? Preparing before you go on to a webinar or anything, running through it with someone else beforehand to help relieve that anxiety. Yeah, that practice, that support that can help relieve the anxiety, that may make you feel better when you're logging on live too.
Okay.
Sorry. I think I'd also add that, as you'll see with my experiences, even if you're using webcams the entire time and spend your entire time on these things, there are problems from now and again. So cut yourself a bit of slack sometimes. The technology is often rather more complicated than you think it should be.
And I wanted to add something here, if I'm allowed. I think probably as well, and Michael's talking about the tablet, and that might be because all the features are on one screen, whereas a computer, you've got a keyboard and a screen, which means that you've got two things to look at. I think if you are going to use perhaps a laptop or a computer where there is a keyboard, there's no reason why in the comfort of your own home, you can ask someone to help you by putting stickers on the up and down keys. You could make them stand out with stickers. you could make the, the sound button stand out with another sticker, so that at least if you press the stickered ones, that's my front door knocking, sorry, if you press the sticker ones, you're going to either move something up or down, or the sound up or down, and that would help you remain as independent on it for at least be able to be left alone on it to sort yourselves out for a bit longer. Just things like that, they work a bit.
Right. It's going to be all of us will struggle if there's too much clutter in our environment, and particularly with PCA, clutter is bad. So try and declutter your environment, and that also means decluttering your screen, your computer, your tablet, etc. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I can't help but jump in on this point. So I think, again, there's a challenge here because you have to be strategic in things like use of contrast or minimizing clutter. So in the most extreme case, if I put a sticker on every single button on my keyboard, clearly that's not going to help me find every single button on my keyboard. But yeah, I think there can be some things that people might find helpful that are to do more with the organizers, perhaps. So in advance of some meetings, to say, hey, I'm joining, I'm living with a diagnosis of PCA. Again, I struggle fumbling around to find exactly where this just as I'm doing right now on my laptop. Perhaps in the video, I can leave it on and give a signal for when or not I can be unmuted. And again, it depends on the actual software that people are using to join the call as well, which makes things more complicated. Michael, you have a point?
Can I just say, at the start, I was actually struggling with technology. And I was asked to do a research with Sheffield University and Bradford University, and they called the program Journeying Through Dementia. And it taught me different ways of working, different strategies to cope with dementia. And one of them was, there was a girl came from Age UK, and we were talking about technology, about tablets, computers, and the setup. I used to go every week for an IT course. And it was them come up with a strategy that I could actually work the tablet better than the computer. So it was actually through Age UK.
I think this also comes down to what we said before about individuals. There are some people who get on with a tablet and some people who get on with a computer. And again, it's probably just finding the environment that works for you, decluttering and consistency. All of us, if the computer is set up the same way, it's more likely to work than if you're messing around with. And I think what Keir was saying about platforms and planning, if you want to have a Zoom call or whatever it is with your relatives, if it's the same time and the same link, and that's going to be easier. It's easier for us all. Whilst there are clearly some special issues with having PCA, obviously, which is why we're having the support group, there's also a lot of generic issues that we're all dealing with, and I think one wants to do what's generally useful as well, and then to think about the specific modifiers that may be helpful. And I agree entirely with Trish about the stickers, and can be extremely helpful.
Great, so thank you. I'm going to move on to questions more regarding treatments and research. So we have a couple of questions regarding recent developments. So the first is, in light of the developments this year in relation to COVID, are there likely to be any off-the-shelf drugs or combinations of drugs that could be used to treat dementias? And I'm also going to include within this question, is there any update or information you can share regarding aducanumab? Perhaps John is best placed to open up this response.
Yeah, so okay, let's start with being honest and open. We don't have any new drugs for dementia at the moment. We don't have any new drugs for PCA. So let's be honest and straightforward from the start, and I think that's important. We're not keeping anything from you, and to be honest, if there were new drugs that were licensed and you guys here on the Rare Dementia Support Network didn't know about them, we wouldn't be doing our jobs. So the answer is we don't have any new medications at the moment. I feel like somewhat like a stuck record when I keep saying that I think there's lots of exciting things around the corner, but I genuinely believe that is the case. So let's turn first of all to aducanumab. So many of you will know about this, many of you won't know about this. But aducanumab is the latest in a long list of drugs which is aiming to clear beta amyloid, which is one of the core proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease from the brain. And we know, of course, that PCA, the majority, if not all, of PCA is caused by Alzheimer's disease. So the idea being that if this drug was useful in Alzheimer's disease, there's no reason why it wouldn't be useful in PCA as well, although it's not being trialed in people with PCA, simply because PCA is somewhat clearly of a special case, and when you want to do large trials, people tend to go with more typical memory-led Alzheimer's disease, although as an aside, that's something that we are very, very much pushing against because we actually feel that people with PCA would in many ways be ideally placed to take in trials for what we have heard before about people's autonomy and able to make decisions and so forth, and that people are often otherwise extremely fit and well. So there's been a lot of toing and froing and excitement and controversy about this drug called aducanumab, because it was initially withdrawn from the trials because interim analysis suggested that it didn't work, and then the company reintroduced it in a rather Lazarus-like way and said they'd done some more analysis and it was looking positive, and it's now with the regulators in the United States to see whether they agree that the evidence is such that it might get a license for treatment. We will hear about this in March. There are very strong views either way about whether it's helpful or not, and I'm not going to go into the pros and cons about that. I will just temper that by saying that there was an open discussion with experts at the Food and Drugs Administration last month, which was rather more negative than people might have hoped. So we need to wait and see what's going to happen. I firmly believe that this will be a useful treatment strategy in some form or another, but it's likely to be a treatment strategy that's most helpful very early in people's illnesses rather than perhaps when they have more established symptoms. In terms of other medication and other trials, we've had, unfortunately, a few other treatment trials that have not succeeded. There are a number of drugs that are being what they call repurposed. So this is getting a new drug into the market is extremely difficult. And a slightly easier approach is to take a drug that's licensed for one thing and trial it in another condition. And so there are trials going on of new medications which are specifically against, much more targeted towards usually Alzheimer's disease pathology, which then hence has the potential to be relevant for PCA, but also taking drugs that are in use for other conditions and trialing those as well, in the knowledge that we know a lot about safety and therefore that's easier. So lots of things that are in development, nothing terribly new at the moment. There are some new drugs that are more involved in perhaps managing symptoms, particularly sort of agitation and so forth, which are showing some promise as well. Ongoing, but nothing new. And I think that there really is a big push to start and think about trials in patients with PCA when normally patients with PCA aren't necessarily eligible for the studies, because if you say, well, one of the first things you've got to have is a memory problem, well, you dismiss quite a lot of people with PCA straight away. So we are linking together with some big American studies which are looking towards making the case for trials of this, and Keir and I have just co-authored a paper which I think is going to be quite a substantial paper, which is looking at atypical forms of Alzheimer's disease with quite a focus on posterior cortical atrophy, which is going to go to one of the major journals. And again, keeping PCA and keeping atypical forms of Alzheimer's disease at the forefront of everyone's minds, particularly when it comes to management, how PCA can help us understand Alzheimer's disease, how we can support people with PCA, and making the case that people with unusual forms of dementia may be ideally suited for trials rather than being precluded from them.
Thank you, John. Any points from the rest of the panel on this topic?
I just wanted to add, from I'm not a medical person, I have no medical training, and I'm not a research fellow, but I will say that some of the things that help are not specifically around the disease, but around your general well-being. So good hydration, good nutrition, keeping an eye on things like your B12, keeping an eye on your vitamin intake, maybe some vitamin D, some outdoors fresh air, physical exercise. Whilst that's not going to cure PCA, it's not going to make a difference to that. It is going to make a difference to everything else. And you cope with horrors in life if the rest of you feels a little bit better. So generally looking at your health as well, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. And of course, what we want to do is improve people's quality of life generally. And for example, one of the biggest things that impairs people's quality of life is if their mood is low. So we mustn't think not about treating people's mood. And I'm sure there's some people on the call, I can't see the list, who I've had the pleasure of seeing as my patients, but people may remember that once we dealing with the person with PCA, I often turn to the person who's with them and say, how is your well-being and mental health and anxiety and mood problems as well? Because dementia is quite often a team sport, if not a very fun sport, but that it doesn't affect just individuals, but carers, families, etc. And so we shouldn't be neglecting the well-being of everybody involved. Quite often we see patients, say with PCA or dementia, who are they're doing fine, but it's their other halves who actually need to get out, have some time to themselves, a bit of fresh air, maybe some talking therapies, maybe an antidepressant, maybe a chat with an advisor, etc. And that's equally fine.
And speak to someone if you're feeling depressed, anxiety. Don't be ashamed if you feel there's a lot of stigma behind that, and seek that support as soon as possible.
With COVID, if you're not feeling anxious and depressed, I think you're in the minority now. So it's very much part of normal life, I think.
So on the topic of, again, perhaps more holistic approaches, I've got a couple of questions. So one of them is there a benefit from exercising the brain? So for example, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, other games, could this even slow down deterioration? And should my wife with PCA be doing these things?
No. I suppose a bit like before, isn't it? The question about well-being, physical and mental well-being, isn't it? And keeping active and affects your mood, and especially signs of depression can affect your memory and your mood. So it's really important to have your overall well-being and doing these activities, keeping busy as well, stimulated as well, especially through the COVID and that isolation that you feel that by not seeing people. It's important to keep your brain active and stimulated that way for your well-being.
So my take on this is, if you ask me for the evidence, there is very little evidence that brain training makes any difference to people who have dementia. But what I would say, and I always say this, is do what you enjoy doing. If you hate doing Sudoku, then believe me, having been diagnosed with PCA, Sudoku is unlikely to improve your quality of life. A combination of visual stuff and calculation is not necessarily going to be good for you. Mind you, if you're a Sudoku fiend, then enjoy it. It's a matter about doing what you enjoy doing. And it's also about getting the balance, is that you don't want to sit at home on your own or quietly not being stimulated enough. At the same time, you don't want to be so overwhelmed with activities and being told to get up and do sorts of things that stresses you as well. And this was what comes down, I think, very much to the individual. All of us have got different capacities for being quiet on our own, needing occupying, needing being other people, getting out, doing brain training, whatever it is that you want to do. And it's about getting the right balance for the individual so that they are stimulated and kept active without being overly stressed by being given a huge list of things that they're tasked to do every day. So do what you enjoy doing. But if you don't enjoy Sudoku, now is not the time to start it.
Can I just say, when I first got diagnosed, they did say to me, try to do things to stimulate the brain, try puzzles, try a bit of reading. But I find over time, it gets hard, because if say I was looking at something in a book, a puzzle or something, it seems to jump all over the page, so I can't actually work out what it is I'm doing. But I have found, I know we're all individuals with all different ways of coping, but for me, picking up the accordion, picking up the flute is my way of escaping from things. You know, it seems to have this thing where it just relaxes me. Dementia just switches dementia off. And then after an hour, 2 hours on the instrument, I absolutely feel brilliant. I feel like a new person.
I think it's many, also a combination of things. That one is music is often very good for people. I mean, you know, there's a huge topic about this, but music is something very sort of inherent in being a sort of human, and many people get a lot of solace and enjoyment from music. Doing something creative, I think, is also helpful. And also, I think, Michael, what you're touching on is that, you know, and again, this is what I went back to about using PCA as a model to discuss dementia. You know, dementia doesn't mean that all the parts of the brain are not working. And as you demonstrate very beautifully with your lovely playing, is that things that are hardwired, that you've learned really, really well before, often are still there. And people are amazed you'll be able to remember poetry that you learned at school, or all these sorts of things, which all of us will be able to do, something that is really, really well learned. And of course, that's often likely to be something you enjoy doing because you've done it in the past. If you've got to that standard, you will have enjoyed doing, and you'll find less stressful about learning something new. So again, this is all about finding the thing that does it for you, and not, as it were, fitting in with somebody else's idea about what might be the right thing for you, but also having a bit of, you know, giving a few things a try as well.
Yeah, again, in my personal experience, I've had people share things like I actually started doing some swimming lessons shortly after a diagnosis, and people actually found that they took to it reasonably well, whereas others, again, would really struggle with that. But also other things like, as John mentioned, people who almost are expecting too much of themselves by saying, oh, I need to really make sure I do these Sudoku puzzles, when you get these trade-offs where actually the amount of stress that it's causing people, if anything, you could be concerned of maybe some adverse consequences. I'd like to also mention on the evidence side, so there was a Cochrane review out last year, and again, just to emphasize, this isn't specific to PCA, that suggested while there was maybe some preliminary evidence in mild to moderate stages of dementia in broad terms about cognitive training on everyday activities, in fact, it depended what you compared cognitive training to. So supposedly there was no evidence for these benefits when comparing cognitive training to things like cognitive stimulation therapy or physical activity. So I'm conscious of time. I think Emma's about to join us.
Yes, hi, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists. We are at time now, but yeah, thank you so much for all of your contributions. Kia, thank you for chairing, and I hope those of you at home found it a really helpful discussion. It is such a unique opportunity, I think, to have such a range of lived experience and professional expertise on the same topics at the same place at the same time. So we really appreciate you all being here, and thank you to all of you who have tuned in. I think we've had 80 of you at least watching today, which is fab. And thank you for sending in your questions. If we haven't got round to them today, we'll be following up now to record the other questions that we didn't get onto, and we'll circulate the recording of this and those questions very soon. And in the meantime, I also just wanted to thank everyone who's been helping behind the scenes and in the run up to today. So thank you to Nikki and Claire and Livy and Alicia and others who have all been working really hard to make today go so smoothly. And just before we leave you with a short video about fundraising for RDS and funding from the National Brain Appeal, just wanted to wish you all a peaceful and restful festive period after what's been a very difficult year for all of us, and we look forward to seeing you all next year. But don't forget that in the meantime, our direct support team is always around between meetings, so if you do need any support, please do reach out, and their contact address is contact@raredementiasupport.org, and one of the team will be in touch. Final huge thank you to our panelists, and take care those of you at home, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia supports 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.